Good afternoon. This is Professor Amina Al-Deen with Muslim Network TV, and this is my show, Critical Talk. And we're looking today at social media and the future, but also in a kind of general way with the ongoing uh, platforms that are being presented to us now that we have a president elect. Uh, and there are lots of questions coming up. What do you want to call it? The conventions, such as they were, did not give us a sense of a platform. We had two sets of people going at each other. One set talking about what it had imagined in its imagination done for Americans. The other set kind of going after the first set, but not really telling us what it was going to take on. And then when it got to what it was going to take on, the plate was huge. So I have with me today Dr. Maytha Alhassen, who's we're welcoming back as a historian, a journalist, a social justice artist, and a mending practitioner. And trust me, me and all my audience need some mending. Her work bridges the worlds of organizing, academic research, media engagement, artistic expression, and spiritually guided healthy practices. Uh, her newest horizon has been in TV and film, writing and consulting. Welcome, Dr. Maytha.
Alaikum. Thank you for having me.
Alaikum salam. No, it is good to have people who I know what they're talking about to join me in some conversation. So I sent you a bunch of stuff, but let me ask you, what do you want to talk about? What is weighing heaviest on your mind?
Oof, so much. I am really concerned with the, use the language, the viral spread of misinformation and disinformation campaigns that are being administered by bad faith actors that have spread, whether it is our WhatsApp groups or social media memes, that we have to do even harder work to disrupt. So
Well,
those
tell
are the,
me what you mean by that. I,
oh,
I have no clue what a meme is.
so
Okay, tell me
I
some more.
yeah. I've been following the QAnon phenomenon for a couple years now. So QAnon being, do you know QAnon? Should I just explain briefly to the audience?
Please, please, and to your wonderful girlfriend over here.
Well, this is, I bring this up because we all have to sharpen our critical media literacy skills.
Exactly.
So when we don't know where information is coming from and we trust it as a source because it's somewhere online or on YouTube,
Right.
then we are part of the chain of communication that amplifies it. So we know, coming from a faith tradition, that there's a rigorous practice around who is a reliable for providing information.
Hmm.
Sometimes we don't apply that to what we consume online. So QAnon is a group that got started on 8chan, which is a dark web channel that mostly white supremacists, right wing folks have migrated, and incel community.
Well, let me stop you there.
Yeah.
For I think when I was in class one day, students showed me what the dark web looked like. I got a glimpse, and I still don't know what I saw. So, would you explain what the dark web is?
If you go on the internet right now
Uh
and type in anything, you're not in the dark web. The dark web is the channel of the internet that's not, that you would have to go through a series of back channels to get to. It's like an underground economy that is not visible, but it
Okay,
has,
but what would I type in?
you're not this is the person who's not as tech savvy as I should. You, it's I believe, I'm not going to I'm not going to speak to it because I don't really know how to get there. I've never been to the dark web.
I
But
saw it once.
but usually the dark web is a space where people might want to sell things that are underground economy. It's where people have done sex trafficking.
Right,
These
right,
these
right.
are places that were operating above ground in the conventional internet area, and then they moved to dark web spaces because they were being monitored. But federal agencies can still track you in dark web spaces. Anyways, the dark web spaces pretty much has attracted people who have had very fringe ideas and have been moved off of an internet space or a
Mm.
conventional internet space. So on this place, which I've never been on 8chan, but I imagine it's kind of like a Reddit or a former forum where people can share information, a guy or somebody came and said, "Hey, I'm Q," and Q is a clearance code within the area of the federal government. And I'm here to tell you there's a deep state plot to get rid of Donald Trump as our president because Donald Trump is going to save Americans. Donald Trump is going to free the kidnapped children. That's where all these Save the Children memes came in, or any of these protests. It came from these. I know, but it gets crazier. So they believe that children are locked in caves underground, that this president, because he's still our president, was tasked and had the interest to free them, and that the deep state, basically the administrative bureaucracy within the government, was preventing him from doing so because they wanted to prey on children as like life immortality juices could be drained from them to as anti-aging.
Are you kidding? You are kidding me, right?
No, no, this is real. This is real. This is called
How did the kids get underground?
well, they so when there are missing children, they believe that this is the story. It's kind of like, do you remember in the 80s, 90s when there was a series of stories about satanic child care centers? So
Yeah.
in a similar sort of way, this panic has emerged, and it started when Trump came into office. And so he called himself QAnon, so Q clearance code anonymous, and the believers in this theory or conspiracy theory are called QAnon. Now, QAnon, as I said, if we've seen any of these Save the Children protests, they've come from QAnon propaganda, and QAnon propaganda has produced something called soft Q, which is a version of the way they see the world to make it um, to make it not pliable, palatable to very different audiences. So, as an example of something that comes and originates from QAnon, there's a lot of anti-mask, Corona is a hoax belief. When Trump said you should inject yourself with bleach to get over coronavirus, he was indicating to their followers to be anti big pharma and just go get homeopathic remedies like bleach to clear yourself from this virus, which is a very dangerous thing. And some people did, and it didn't end well for them. So, so an iteration of that, although people in our community might not call themselves QAnon, they might not be right wing supporters, but they've preyed on the skepticism, and it makes sense. I have skepticism about this government. There's real conspiracies that this government
Right.
has done to Black communities, to surveillance of my community,
Right.
um, but they've preyed upon that natural skepticism to direct it towards their vision and their goal of the world, or their vision of the world, which is Trump is supposed to be the savior to make America great again. So that, like, all these misinformation campaigns around coronavirus as being the mask wearing being a domino effect towards more state surveillance. I mean, this stuff I could go for hour plus about how crazy conspiracy wise this gets. but I'm just leaving it here. I mean, in some cases, it involves like lizard people, new world order, governance, turning us into automaton slaves for the new world order. But it's spreading. It's spreading to people who are left wing skeptics, and that's what concerns me.
Well, oh, how do I'm trying to
Oh, they think the vaccine is going to contain a chip that is going to isn't implantable. It's going to monitor us. Um, all of these things that we've seen sometimes connected to really nefarious bad faith intentions, which is I I'm not going to push people to take a vaccine or anything, but be skeptical around who is giving you the information, if they're a medical expert or not. And unfortunately, they've taken on the skepticism instead of the medical expert opinion, and they've allowed that to subvert any of their scruples.
well, as journalists, that we've had some really poor media communication. One is, I used to be such a fan. I would mix it up: CNN, MSNBC, little Fox News, trying to get a wide scope of what was happening. And then when the election started, Fox News did its thing, but MSNBC seemed to take a page out of Fox to do the same thing on the right. I mean, on the left. And so it got to be, where is a journalist? Have people lost the sense of what journalists actually do? I mean, they're not just cute men and women who read teleprompters. They're supposed to be people who do actual journalism.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there was a big disintegration and breakdown of the industry of journalism. There's good and bad that came from it
Right.
because of neoliberal economics. And we've seen how that devastated academia. I can break down what it did to TV broadcast journalism. So, with
Say
the
more.
stick,
Say more. That's important. We haven't
yeah,
covered
yeah. So, with let's go with uh, CNN and MSNBC as an examples of 24-hour news networks where
that.
you've
Right.
seen a kind of decline. And I think there can be sometimes interesting opinions on those networks, but it's become opinion driven
Yeah.
um, entertainment watch, which was a Fox News model, as you said, because they realized that what they could do was package emotional segments that had some data points that are could be disputed, and
Right.
then they put the seal of news on it. So what happened with CNN, I can speak specifically. I had a friend working there in the investigative journalism department. But around the time that Occupy was happening, the uprisings, they started to slash their investigative journalist bureaus. Yes, exactly. So we're asking ourselves, then where are we getting the information? So what started happening is some of these places, MSNBC has NBC local affiliates, so they can pull reporters or correspondents from local news stations on the ground. This is what Fox News can do as well. But
Mm,
CNN has some relationships where they could do that, but they don't have in-house investigative journalists. They might do investigations to some degree, but what this meant was they leaned heavier on the featured contributor model. And what that is when you see a Fox News anchor and then two people to their side, or sometimes they fill out the panel, but basically what they want to try to show is that there's two sides, a Republican and a Democrat, and they usually have somebody who is affiliated with those parties. So you have a Republican operative, you have a Democratic operative, and so they just started to give free advertising for those parties. Basically, like you don't see many people outside of the bounds of that system.
right.
And what they would have them do is debate a topic, or they call it debate, but basically they just wanted that friction to make it more entertaining. And because they got criticism, again, let's stick to CNN specifically, for putting so much of the camera focus on Trump during the election cycle, they decided to not put so much, but instead use his tweets to have people debate out those tweets from the featured contributors that are representatives of the Republican or Democratic Party. And
Right.
then the gig for them is to consistently be brought on. I mean, they have White House correspondents for
Right.
some
Right.
road to, but they don't really have a source for generating news information. They'll take it from the newspapers, the online press, or they'll just go to the White House, or they'll just go online. And so, unfortunately, we've lost a critical feature of the TV news industry that had correspondents in different places, did investigative work, and now a dying industry. The local news is one of the few places that still does investigation. So we have to rely on them. But I have sources I could tell you that I really love. I mean, I'm on a show called The Young Turks and people get their news from there, but I always remind them we're just commentators. We are not the ones who
What
are
is the name of the show again?
the Young Turks.
Oh, I know the Young Turks.
Yeah, I'll
Oh,
come
we're
up with
still
a,
on.
yeah, they're still on. And
Okay.
I mean, we bring up news stories that the Washington Post, New York Times, Vox, any of these outlets write about, but we're not making news. We are commenting
On.
on the news. And
No,
so
that's
that
a wonderful program.
Thanks. Yeah. So, but there are places that are still sourcing stories with journalists that go through a detailed vetting process to get
Hmm.
their stories on that I rely on, like Reveal, which is podcast radio
Hmm.
format, and they're founded by or from the Center of Investigative Journalism, so that's their politics is
Yeah.
doing that work. Mother Jones is amazing.
Right.
ProPublica is great, and
Yeah.
ProPublica has teamed up with Frontline on PBS to produce TV long hour formats of their
Mhm.
investigations. So we still have some of those places, but we don't know about them, and we turn to CNN and MSNBC and don't realize how it's part of a financial model, and that's why it's disappointing to watch
It's
what we're
just
watching.
become business. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. And I want to come back and speak some more to social media because during this pandemic, many of those who had avoided social media because of all of the risk are finding themselves out of the loop. This is Professor Al-Deen. I am talking with Dr. Maytha Alhassen, and we will be right back on Muslim Network TV and Critical Talk.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an
Our neighbors don't
eye-catching
realize
message.
that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No me! No justice! No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world? You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward. That lesson learned brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
This is Professor Al-Deen, and I am honored to be here with Dr. Maytha Alhassen, and we're talking about loads of stuff. But primarily, right now, we're going to talk about social media. Many of us, I mean, I avoided social media actually until the pandemic. And my students would tell me what was there and what wasn't there because the risks were too great and you have to pay too much attention for me. I like talking to people, not reading stuff all day long and running around with a device in my hand so that I don't have dinner with my family and people come to the dinner table with the device and the device rules. It's something about that that drives me a little bit batty. And even though I have two things, I think students put up for me a Facebook page and what's that other thing?
Instagram, Twitter.
Instagram. I never look at them. People still have to tell me what's on them. Um, but what is the value when now a device has taken over our human relationships?
Yeah. You know, when they started using telephones, one of the big fears was that people were talking to ghosts because there was a disembodied experience. So
Mm,
every technological shift, there is a different adaptation,
mm-hmm.
adaptation process that our bodies and our beings have to go through
Yeah.
to integrate it. And I feel you. I think one of the things lately that has been concerning me is how quick not only can we digest what we're reading, which is sometimes truncated, but how quickly we are expected to synthesize and then put out into the world what we think. So there is a time of reaction and not response that is kind of the pace of this social media ecosystem that alarms me now, and I probably should have thought about it a little bit later, but it coming from a yoga practice, a spiritual practice, I sit and think about what it means to process information that that we're receiving.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so that is definitely a concern, and they are gamifying. You know the term gamifying, right?
Well, kind of.
So basically, these social media apps create reward systems that
Yeah.
specifically target how the brain responds to release,
Like, it's
dopamine
like,
and just feel happy. And so
mm,
there isn't a gamified addictive quality to these apps as they're constantly trying to make more pleasant user facing um, uh, user face um, and also the likes are part of the gamifying, and it's if we took a step back, maybe 20 years forward or 20 years back, that's still wild that we are being judged with and seeing how people respond to our statements in real time, because it does go on.
if you close yourself up with this device, I had students who were seeing psychiatrists
Yeah,
because of something they put up on somewhere. And I said, well, why would you expect an audience of strangers, all of them to like you? And why would you want a bunch of strangers to like you? Now, while they didn't have an answer for that, they had gotten so depressed and anxious
yeah.
over being disliked that it drove them to have to go see a specialist.
Yeah, yeah. I think like I said, that adaptation process is something we don't talk enough about, is how we integrate everything that we're seeing so that we can have a healthy relationship to this tool. It's a tool. There are elements to the tool that are beautiful, can connect me to me and my
Right, right,
family.
right.
We're talking now. The reason why Zoom or any of these video based apps are so popular, they came from a desire to have and create community, which is a feature of these social media platforms,
Right.
was adding these video elements. Now, the thing that becomes really difficult is, as you said, that relationship that people have to a device and maybe that anonymous community that they judge their self-worth and their value with. I mean, there's a reason why, as you know, on college campuses, that there's a skyrocketing epidemic of
Mm-hmm.
suicides because people are watching this highlight reel on social media platforms on Instagram, and they are judging their own lives and their loneliness and their sadness, especially to think about it, to be disconnected for the first time from home, being shoved up in a dorm where most people find their connection through a phone. That disconnection and that perception that everybody else is connecting is a big a big problem emotionally that we took on, not not at the start of this pandemic. It was already happening before this pandemic, so it was only heightened with even more distance that people were feeling from each other. So I agree. I don't I it's interesting to think about why people would assume that what people curate and put online is how the totality of their lives operate. And that's a question and a intervention we have to make as community members, as people who see ourselves as healers, is to get people back into the body. And I do want to say a physiological note, which is interesting. When you stare at this thing and you're like this the whole time, you're creating for your nervous system, and for your eyes, a focus, a deep emphasis on focus. And what that does, you dilate your pupils, um, is it closes off the periphery. And
Right.
what happens to the human body, the distinction between being in a horizon space like a beach, or when you're driving in the open road and you see the whole horizon, there are no cars in front of you,
Right.
is a certain stress response. So to focus in produces a fight or flight, a what they call a sympathetic nervous system response. Because when we needed to use it, we were in um, hunting mode, or we were in a space where we needed to very quickly get the adrenaline and to
Right.
concentrate. But in an open field, at a beach, it relaxes your nervous system, because we're somewhere in between prey and predator. The
Right.
predator has that zero, that narrow focus. And if we operate that the whole time, that's something that I've been thinking about, that I'm concerned with, is what that does to our sense of kindness, to our sense of care, to our sense of
Exactly.
mercy.
How are you going to care? All you're focusing on is you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even the it's you, but the physiology of like what that does to look at this thing
Yeah.
all day.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. I just find it remarkable that I mean I'm looking at students don't know how to write a sentence because
Oh yeah.
there's vocabulary and all of these abbreviations that come. So they're flunking courses because they can't even write a readable sentence.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that with all the symbolism that they can do math any better, because they can't do that either.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
really, really pitiful. Pitiful. Well, I want to come back and talk about one of your passions, which is social activism that you marry with your scholarship after this break. This is Professor Al-Deen talking with Dr. Maytha Alhassen, and we're talking about a bunch of stuff that's really, really important. So hang in there, guys.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's world because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's world because it makes me happy. What? No. 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 And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is really smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
This is Professor Al-Deen and Dr. Maytha Alhassen, and we're talking about a lot of stuff, mostly because she does so many things. I can go anywhere But I want to go to, I've kind of tuned out on MSNBC and CNN, and I will listen to the BBC before I listen to anything, or I'll go on out Vice, or I'll read the Guardian and some other things. And one of the I'm listening. It's like somebody holds a carrot and a stick kind of thing, where, oh, we need to do something about DACA. Okay. But people are starving, getting ready to get put out of their houses, and they have no jobs, and there's a surge in coronavirus. So, do I have space in my head to worry about DACA? Then it's, oh, we're going to do vaccines. Well, we all know that, first of all, it takes a minute to get a vaccine. And then, second of all, when you get one, it's going to be so hurried that you're going to have a lot of errors, even though you have an emergency use kind of thing. And then first responders and older people are supposed to get it. And then two people died today because they forgot to ask in the questionnaire, do you have medical conditions? Kind of dumb for older people, right? And do you have any allergies? So they had to shut down the vaccination and go back and ask her. Now you got people sitting there on a chair, all arm on the table, waiting to get shot.
Wait, where was this for?
This
The
was in the
vaccine
UK
trials
where
in
they've
the UK?
done it first. So,
Oh,
you have these pundits on um I refuse to call them journalists because they're really not journalists. On CNN and MSNBC, trying to play doctor, running around. Oh, well, you're going to have it by Friday. Really?
yeah, no.
No. I mean, there is a protocol. In the best of times, there's a protocol. And just running off your mouth because you have, and the idiot that's your editor putting the stuff on the teleprompter knows as much as you do, and you're giving out bad messages again.
Yeah. There is a big gap between science communication and media understanding of that science. How many times during this epidemic have we seen, or this pandemic, have we seen a paper that's released and then it's interpreted by the journalistic community, then causes mass confusion? So, as an example, there was a study about the idea of maybe reinfection or long haulers. The jury's still
Right,
out whether people continue to have it for a long period of time or there's a short antibody window. But
right,
if journalists are just going to only, we have National Press Foundation briefings, only a briefing, they can ask their questions there, which is great, and maybe reading some top line headlines of a peer reviewed paper, but not reading the whole paper and not understanding the scientific language,
hmm
then that that intermediary is possibly doing a disinformation service. So there's a lot, but we also should be patient with the idea that this is a novel coronavirus. So there are so many things that they're learning about for the first time. There's a big misjudgment around wearing masks initially. Remember, there was a belief that we didn't have enough masks, so they didn't advise us to wear masks. So
right.
that was driven by market economics, unfortunately.
Exactly.
So there are all these forces and variables at play, and that's what I mean by critical media literacy, is to think about how information is being sourced, what some of the stakes are, what are the interests economically that they might have in telling a story, or what their training might be to understand the story that they're conveying. As we
Right.
know from communities that are historically marginalized from mainstream media news, from conventional news, that there's a lot we don't believe what they say about us, right? And then
Exactly. Exactly.
they've shifted some of that stuff. But I will say, there is something called the COVID Tracking Project, which is also a collaboration between COVID Tracking Project and the Atlantic, and they're trying to do a better job communicating the science by analyzing and then getting a team of people who are epidemiologists but also specialize in communicating that. And
Yeah,
those are the people that I'll turn to. And it's sometimes hard to find those folks because it is a skill set for us to understand each other. When,
it is.
as you,
It is.
in the US especially, we've done such a horrible job teaching our population to understand the hard sciences, to understand and math in general. So we have a lot that's being revealed
I
through
know it's a mess. But if you had to choose several things on what kind of is Biden's platform, what should go first?
Oh my God. That's so difficult because there was so much that was undone that needs to be redone. As
Yes,
we saw the DACA, or the first couple of weeks during the 45's administration from January 21st till midway February, he put into place so many executive orders that one needs
193.
that need to be undone. And
Hmm.
so the Biden administration has expressed a desire to do that, to also focus in the first 100 days with great detail around the coronavirus. I think that's a massive issue, but they also need to get a team of people on board who are going to be able to, I don't know. I don't know. This country is so difficult, man. I mean, I was just thinking about like what we need, unfortunately, to get through this pandemic is a collective game plan. But so many people, because of this current president, believe he was robbed of this election. They're going to refuse to get on board with some of the things that are either just going to be an extension of pretty centrist ideas. Like there's nothing that's going to be radical. But what I would say from a social justice, which was the earlier part of your question that I didn't answer, perspective is that we can do everything at the same time, and we can have those commitments and be assured that there are people in each lane that have been doing this work not just for a couple of years, for decades. So you mentioned DACA. I have friends that have been at the border from Obama to Trump's administration. They've been sitting and doing this work even further back to Bush era.
Yeah.
So you can care. What you have to do is find out what is the lane that you are most skilled at, that you have a community connection to, and how can your resources be properly utilized to bring about a transformation around that issue. So for me, I have various touch points because I've been involved in this movement from New York to Los Angeles. And as a journalist, I'm already used to having those connections to so many different communities. But you can think intersectionally and act in one lane, and that's fine. We need everybody to do the work that is the most aligned with what you can bring to the table.
That's true, and that's definitely not happening. Well, I want to switch to something that my audience, once they saw you and who you were, and your relationship to the program Rami.
Yeah.
Now, why Rami? Why was it written like that? Was this an opportunity to look at ordinary Arab Americans? Why was the fixation on sex addiction and interesting kind of spiritual stuff?
Yeah. Thank you. And hopefully soon we'll be able to have Rami to speak to the depth of his vision. I can only do so much to communicate what his intentions are, especially sitting by him through this process for a while. I've known him for a good amount of time, and beginning
Mhm.
him start up giving him dramaturg feedback. In fact, I would go to his shows and I don't have a filter, just truth serum comes through. And I would tell him what I really thought about things. And to his credit, he would respond with, "Oh, I like that you're honest. I want to keep you around." And that's very rare for people who are ascending, not just in the Hollywood space, in so many other places where it's easy to have yes people.
Mm.
Rami really loves that I bring in the critique and the historical angle. So what he wanted to do with a show like this, a lot of it is based on his stand-up comedy. Also, a lot of
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
based, as he says, is an emotional biography of his life. But
Mm.
it's not the exact details. And as you'll find trying to do TV and film, there are things that are based on true stories, but it allows us to have a template to play with. So while they might start out in a certain way through a writer's room, they end up in a different direction. But basically, Rami, the way he so beautifully talks about his show is getting to the tension point of who we think we are and who we actually are. So
Mm-hmm.
who we want to be and who we are is really the question driving the show. These are universal questions, but as you asked, there is a specificity. He is rooting it in an Egyptian Muslim family from Jersey, told through the eyes of an Arab millennial dude living in his parents' house. So the idea is to use that specificity and not to say this is all universal Muslim experience. It's to say when we can get to the specific details of our lives through storytelling, then we can get to those more universal questions that we have about our relationship to faith, about our relationship to being in the diaspora and between two worlds, between New Jersey and Egypt, and between assumptions from both places in a time of economic strife and strife within around what it means to be an Arab, a heterosexual Arab man, um, and to be honest about the things that we like to hide under the cover, which is, in the writer's room, we talked about the pervasive porn addiction that is a part of our community.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so that became a central plot point in season 2. And we even sourced it from online material that we saw of places that are trying to treat this addiction. But Rami explains it really interestingly. He said because there was such a deep focus and emphasis on not having sex before marriage, he thought porn would stave it off for him. And so again, because we're not having these conversations with each other,
Exactly.
we
Exactly.
don't we just tell people don't do this, and then they have to figure out how to deal with these internal emotions and desires
Right.
because now they're told that everything is haram, that they can't, it's hard for them to figure out a place without judgment, that they can ask how to deal with the things that are happening within. And so what you see in the storytelling is that there is a desire to be better, to tell the truth, but it doesn't all happen at the same time. And we're looking at people's flaws. And that's something else that as a community,
We
we
never
need, we don't want to create the space to
do.
come and, as Rami says, meet at our fault lines, because then we're supposed to be a bad person. But actually, a um, this is an inheritance from Western European philosophy around Christianity, was that you were born sinned and you have to try to be good, and there's only that good bad binary, versus our struggle as Muslims is that we forgot our connection to the divine and we have to figure out how to remember again. It
Yeah.
doesn't operate on this access of good or bad, but when you live in the West, where that's how we understand our relationship to faith, then we don't make room for the fault lines.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. I found that my students, everybody was watching Rami and Hassan Minhaj.
Yeah.
When I got to people not quite as old as me, but the one generation up, it was, I know they're watching, but they didn't want to tell anybody they were watching. Then when you got to people my age, it became, well, I watched one episode and I wasn't sure where this was going. So I said, well, why didn't you keep watching to see where it was going? Well, I don't know. I don't know if we want to be represented like that on air, and I don't know if that's the truth. I said, it's everywhere. What you're trying to hide, everybody else knows. So
Mm,
what are you talking about? But it brought so much um, to light. I read, and to show you where the breakdown is, I was reading a care alert the other day that talked about we want to demand that they have Arab studies in school, Arab American studies in school. And I said, that would be great. Um, I don't think you know what you're asking for since most Arab Americans are Christian, but go ahead and demand it anyway. I mean, just no real understanding of the reality in which people live. And I was thinking that brought me full circle back to Biden and Harris. You can't have his the he has front loaded his platform with so many things that you begin to wonder if anything will be done well. We've
Mm.
uncovered so much from our teleprompter readers to the bad everything, to the dark web, to this, that, and the other. I don't know if you're going to fix those things in one 4-year cycle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then for you who has to go back into classrooms periodically, how does one begin to write a syllabus for this craziness? I can't even imagine.
Yeah. I started to teach and develop a couple of classes, one called Intro to Human Rights. And typically, a class like that would be very UN heavy
Oh,
or an NGO, but I shifted it to have a discussion basically about an intro to social justice. And we spent a couple weeks around critiques around the concept of human rights. But
mm,
then after that theoretical place, we went and tracked movements that have arisen from the historic tension points and struggles
yeah.
and came out and offered us a new vision for a world of love, freedom, justice.
Mm,
So I, as a historian and anthropologist light, I tend to really root in the stories of our ancestors surviving and thriving under even more precarious, oppressive conditions. I mean, they're not me, but there are people in this country, could be your story, could be viewer stories that lived through slavery, Jim Crow, or genocide, and or genocide.
right,
So just thinking about the history of our ancestors is a starting point enough that we don't, there are things that a state level government top down have done to make this a much more difficult pandemic than it needed to be. But
yeah,
we have to learn how to rely on ourselves as a community, not as individuals, because the top down is not how transformation is going to come. It
right,
the the hierarchically, the vested interest is to maintain a status quo, but
right,
in the bottom, we're like the tectonic plates. We need to shake things up so
right,
that we remember that we're the pulse of the earth and that we create the fissures that are necessary to shift and change what we need. I mean, it's crazy to think about our tax dollars are not redistributed back to us as a form of stimulus on a monthly basis, like almost every other country in this nation, because they want to be able to put in a plan, mostly the Republicans, to be able to give corporations full scale immunity. Because,
right,
the ACLU now is suing meat packing plants for exposing folks to coronavirus, and they
right,
don't want
right,
to give that liability. But our lives should be at the center, and the only ones that are going to advocate for our lives are ourselves. So while there might be promises, an administration is not a panacea. An administration is not going to get us everything we want and need. Part of the work we do on this earth, and as we say in our faith tradition, is to struggle. So that struggle is not just an internal spiritual one, it's the one we do with each other to create better conditions for ourselves and for the environment that we were beautifully given to step on. and to take fruit and vegetables from. So
I
yeah.
think it's going to be interesting because they have cut the stimulus package, which still hasn't passed, down to a pittance. Moratoriums are getting ready to be up. Unemployment insurance is getting ready to be up. And we're talking about a matter of weeks, if not less, right around the Christmas holidays for many. And I mean, what kind of hell are people inviting? Is this deliberate or not? I'm going to have to again cut our
Oh, you
conversation.
can't end on that question. Is this
I
deliberate or
know,
not?
I know, I know.
I mean, I
Which
would say a
means I
little
have
of
to
both,
track
but
you
we'll have to
down.
continue.
Huh?
We'll have to continue with depth. I would say a little bit of both, but yeah.
Yes, I have to track you down again, get your head out of those papers, or catch you before your head goes back into the papers that you're grading, and get you back on here again. This is Muslim Network TV. This is Professor Al-Deen and Dr. Maytha Alhassen. We have talked about a lot of stuff, and it's all been great. And we will be back.